Something was wrong before anyone could name it. The incense was burning. The choirs were assembled. Thousands of pilgrims had traveled from every corner of the world to stand beneath the open Roman sky, wrapped in morning light, waiting for a ceremony that had been performed for centuries without interruption. Cardinals in full vestments stood in their appointed places. Camera crews had been positioned since before dawn. Every element of one of the most sacred and public rituals in the Catholic calendar was in place, ready, breathing, alive with anticipation. And then word came through the corridors of the Apostolic Palace, like a cold draft moving through a room with no open windows. It was stopped. Not delayed, not rescheduled. Stopped. Cardinal Moroni heard it first from a young deacon, whose hands were shaking as he delivered the message. He stood very still for a moment, trying to decide if he had misunderstood. He had not. He found his way to the papal sacristy, where other senior clergy had already gathered, standing in the particular silence of men who do not know what to do with information that makes no sense. The Swiss guards at the doors were rigid in their uniforms, but their eyes were moving in ways they normally never allowed. Something had arrived in the building that none of the protocols had anticipated. "Where is he?" Moroni asked, meaning the Pope. No one answered directly. Someone gestured toward the closed inner door of the chamber. "He's been inside alone since before dawn," a secretary offered. He gave no explanation. He only said to stop everything, to wait. Cardinal Moroni stood outside that door and felt something he had not felt in the entirety of his ecclesiastical career. Not fear exactly. Something quieter and more unsettling than fear. The recognition that whatever was unfolding on the other side of that door was not a crisis he could manage. It was something else entirely. When Pope Leo XIV finally emerged, he was not dressed for the ceremony. His white cassock was slightly disheveled, the sleeves marked with the evidence of prolonged and physical prayer. His face was composed in the way that faces become composed after they have passed through something enormous and arrived at a fragile stillness on the other side. He looked at the assembled clergy the way a man looks at familiar things after returning from somewhere very far away. They pressed him immediately. The square was full. The broadcast was live. Explanations were needed. Something had to be said to the thousands waiting outside, who could see from the square that the procession had not begun and were already constructing theories. Leo raised his hand. One gesture. The room went still. "I will not be proceeding with the ceremony," he said. "Not today." Murmurs broke out. Cardinals who had spent decades in rooms where composure was the only permitted response visibly struggled. "Holy Father," someone ventured, "the world is watching. You must give us something. We cannot stand in front of those cameras with nothing." Leo looked at the man who had spoken, and what passed across his face in that moment was not the hesitation of a man searching for words. It was the expression of a man who possessed words that were too large for the room. "Follow me," he said. He did not turn toward the grand ceremonial halls. He turned toward a narrow corridor that ran along the interior eastern wall of the palace, a passageway used primarily by maintenance staff and, on rare occasions, by popes who wished to walk without being observed. He moved toward a staircase that descended rather than climbed. Cardinal Moroni exchanged a look with his colleague Cardinal Voss. Neither had ever been asked to follow the Pope into the lower levels of the palace. This was not a known route to any room of significance. "Where are you taking us?" Voss called after him, the edge in his voice carefully controlled. Leo spoke without slowing his descent. "To where I was this morning when I heard what I heard." Moroni felt something shift in the air of the corridor. The temperature dropped a degree or two as they moved lower. The stone walls were older here, the kind of old that doesn't announce itself through decoration but through weight, through the feeling of compressed centuries pressing outward from the masonry. When they reached the bottom of the staircase, Leo stood before a door, heavy oak banded with iron, its hinges eaten by rust that had been there for generations, its surface unadorned. A door that should have led to nothing of consequence. Storage, perhaps. An abandoned utility room. The kind of space a large ancient building accumulates without cataloguing. Leo put his hand flat against the wood. His back was to them, but both cardinals could see that his shoulders were carrying something physical with that gesture. Not weight exactly. Something closer to the posture of a man pressing his hand against the door of a place that changed him. "There was a light when I arrived here this morning," he said quietly, "from beneath the door. And I want you to understand that there is no electrical fixture in this room. There is no lamp. I checked. I looked at every wall." Moroni's voice came out softer than intended. "What kind of light?" Leo pushed open the door. The room beyond was small and bare. No furnishings, no decoration, no evidence that any human being had occupied it purposefully in generations. But two things were immediately, undeniably present. First, a beam of light falling from a narrow aperture near the ceiling, a shaft of illumination that moved through the dusty air in a way that natural light does not typically move, slower, more deliberate, carrying something luminous in its particles. Second, at the center of the stone floor, a marble slab. And on its surface, carved with extraordinary precision into stone that must have been set in place before this section of the palace was built above it, a symbol. Moroni approached it slowly, the way one approaches something that commands respect, before understanding. He was a historian before he was a cardinal. He knew early Christian iconography with professional fluency. He had studied the catacombs, the pre-Nicene symbols, the visual vocabulary of the first centuries of the faith. He did not recognize this. Not Constantinian, not apostolic, not from any tradition he could place with confidence. It existed in a category outside his considerable knowledge, and that fact alone sent a tremor through his chest. Leo was speaking again, slowly, choosing words with the care of someone giving testimony rather than explanation. "I came here before dawn, because I needed the kind of quiet that the public rooms of this palace do not offer. I knelt to pray. And then, while I was praying, I heard my name." Voss straightened. "Someone was in the room with you?" "No one was in the room," Leo replied. "I had been here alone for some time. The voice did not come from a human source. It did not come from any particular direction." He paused. It came from the quality of the silence itself, as though the silence had been waiting to become a voice. Moroni said nothing. He was looking at the slab. Leo continued. The voice said only 2 words. "Not yet." He let those words settle. I understood them to refer to the ceremony. I understood with a certainty I cannot fully explain that I was not meant to stand before the world this morning in the manner that had been planned. And then, as I was rising from my knees, the edge of the slab shifted. Just slightly, as though releasing something. Voss spoke, voice carefully flat. "You mean the stone moved on its own?" "I mean the stone moved," Leo answered, without making it a debate. He knelt at the edge of the marble and placed both hands on its surface. He looked at the 2 guards who had followed at a discreet distance and nodded once. They moved forward and assisted him. The slab rose with the groan of stone that has not moved in a very long time, the sound low and grinding, and beneath it, in a cavity carved with unmistakable intentionality into the foundation floor, lay a scroll. Moroni's breath left his body. It was wrapped in linen that had petrified with age into something closer to stone than fabric. Sealed with wax so ancient it had lost its color entirely, gone grey as ash, as bone. The seal bore a mark, the same mark that was carved on the slab above it, the symbol that belonged to no catalogue, no archive, no tradition that either cardinal could place. "This is not in any Vatican record," Moroni said, barely a whisper. "I have spent 30 years studying the contents of these archives. Nothing like this has ever been catalogued." Leo's answer was quiet. "That is because no one knew it was here. Not until this morning." Voss circled the cavity slowly, examining the carved edges. "Moroni," he said, his voice stripped of its usual authority. "Look at the work. Look at the tool marks on the stone." Moroni looked. He understood immediately what he was being shown. This predates the palace. It predates the structures above it. Possibly it predates the basilica itself. His voice dropped. "If the tool marks are what they appear to be, this cavity was cut in the 1st century. Nobody spoke. "The first century," Voss finally said. Leo lifted the scroll from its resting place. The linen wrapping crumbled at the edges as he touched it, releasing a smell both of them would later struggle to describe. Not decay. Something older than decay. The smell of arrested time. Back in Leo's private study, the scroll was laid on the desk. They worked slowly, with the reverence of men who understood that they were handling something that existed outside the categories they had been trained in. The parchment, when finally unrolled, was dark with age, but not illegible. Under the angle of the study lamp, the text seemed to gather itself, as though responding to being seen for the first time in centuries. The script was Aramaic. Early Aramaic, Moroni confirmed, his voice barely functioning, a dialect that had not been in active use since the 2nd century at the latest. He translated haltingly, stopping to verify, backtracking, reading forward again. "To the shepherd who comes in the final season, the first line read." Voss sat down. Moroni kept reading, "You will stop a great ceremony. You will be summoned by a voice not belonging to any man. You will find this beneath the stone on the day appointed for your listening." What was prepared for this morning was not what heaven requires. Stillness before speech. Discovery before declaration. No one in the room moved for a long time. Then Moroni, who had spent his career in service of a faith he possessed intellectually and practically, found that his hands were shaking. "This is addressed to you," he said, looking at Leo. "This text, written 2,000 years ago, is addressed to a pope who would stop a ceremony because a voice called him by name." Leo was staring at the scroll. His expression was beyond interpretation. It contained too many things at once. There was more text. Further down the parchment, in ink noticeably different from the first lines, darker, better preserved, less aged, additional markings appeared. These were not from the same hand or the same period. A second author, working centuries later, had added to the document. Their script was a form of early Syriac that Moroni recognized from catacomb inscriptions, placing it somewhere in the 4th or 5th century. Christians who had found this scroll read it and added to it. Christians who believed it was genuine. The added line read, "He will know it when he sees it." Leo reached into his cassock and withdrew the small prayer card he carried, a card given to every pope, bearing an inscription from the early catacombs in the same dialect. He placed it beside the scroll. The script was identical. The hand was similar enough to suggest it was the same author. Someone in the early church had found this scroll, read its prophecy, and added a note for whoever would find it next. He will know it when he sees it. What came next arrived before any of them had decided what to do with what they already knew. The lights in the study flickered, not randomly, in a pattern. 3 pulses, a pause, then 3 pulses again, a rhythm too precise to be electrical fault. Moroni looked at the ceiling. Voss moved to the window and immediately went still. "What?" Moroni asked. Voss didn't answer immediately. He stared down into the square. Then he said, very quietly, "Come and look at this." The crowd in St. Peter's Square had not dispersed despite the cancelled ceremony. Thousands remained, milling, uncertain, waiting for some explanation to emerge from the palace. And as the 3 men looked down from the study window, they saw it. The movement of the crowd, the natural ebb and drift of people in a confined space, had produced a shape. Not intentionally, not deliberately, but unmistakably. The symbol from the slab, the mark that belonged to no archive. It was forming below them in the negative space of the crowd's unconscious movement. The same lines, the same proportions, drawn in living bodies by no one's design. Moroni whispered a word that was not a word, just sound. Leo stared at it for a long time. Then he said simply, "I need to speak to them." They argued with him in the corridor outside. Voss was practical and direct. "You cannot go out there and mention prophecy," he said. "You cannot reference a discovered scroll without full authentication. The theological implications alone require years of study. You will ignite every conspiracy theory, every fringe interpretation, every hostile critic. You will create an international crisis before you have answers." Moroni agreed. "Holy Father, at minimum, let us control the framing." A carefully worded statement. An acknowledgement of a significant discovery without specifics. Time to prepare. Leo listened to both of them. Then he said, "The prophecy itself told me what would happen. That the world would hear my voice before I fully understood the message." He held up the scroll. That line appeared on the parchment after I had already decided to speak. Neither cardinal had an answer for that. Leo stepped onto the balcony. The square went silent the moment he appeared. Not gradually. Immediately. As though the crowd had been a single organism waiting for its cue. Tens of thousands of faces turned upward in unison. The cameras caught it all. Leo did not reach for the prepared remarks that had been written for the ceremony. He spoke from the place the morning had put him. "Beloved," he said, and his voice carried through the square with a clarity that the broadcast engineers would later struggle to explain against the ambient conditions. "Today's ceremony has been stopped because of something heaven placed before me this morning." He paused. "I will tell you what I know, and I will not tell you what I do not yet understand. Those two things are not the same thing, and you deserve the distinction." He told them about the voice. 2 words. Not yet. He told them about the chamber, the slab, the scroll. He did not read from it. He held it up so the cameras could see it, ancient and real, undeniable in its physical presence. He told them that it appeared to have been written for this moment, for this pope, for this morning. He told them it would be studied, authenticated, and that the truth of what it contained would not be held from the world. And then, something in the square shifted again. The symbol formed by the crowd brightened at its edges, not because of light, but because the people on the perimeter had stopped moving, fixing the shape. They didn't know they were doing it. A single voice from deep in the crowd shouted a question that Leo had not anticipated. "What did the voice say to you?" He paused. The crowd picked up the question, a wave of it moving outward. "What did you hear? What did God say?" Leo had not told anyone about the voice except Moroni and Voss. It had not been in any statement, and yet they were asking. He looked down at the scroll in his hands, then out at the sea of faces, then at the symbol they had formed without knowing it. He stepped back to the microphone. "Not yet," he said. Those were the words, "not yet." Which means that what you are waiting for, what this morning has been preparing, has not yet arrived. We are standing at the beginning of something, not its conclusion. He lifted the scroll one final time. "I promise you this," he said. "What has been hidden will not remain hidden. What you cannot yet see, you will see, and I will not stand before you again until I am prepared to speak the full truth of what this is." He stepped back. Moroni moved to his side, voice low and urgent. "The last line," he said. "Look at the scroll." A new line had appeared at the bottom of the parchment, ink surfacing from nothing, words completing themselves as though being written by an invisible hand in real time. "He will speak before he understands," it read, "and the world will be ready before he is." Leo stared at it. Then he looked up at Moroni with an expression that contained no more room for surprise, only the steady weight of a man who has accepted that the ground beneath his life has permanently shifted. "The ceremony is finished," he said, "but this has only just begun." He turned back toward the palace doors, the scroll held against his chest, every lamp in the corridor behind him burning bright and steady, as though the building itself had remembered how to breathe. In the square below, the symbol held its shape. The crowd remained, uncertain of what they had witnessed, certain that whatever it was had not yet given them its final word. And somewhere below the marble floors of the apostolic palace, in a chamber older than the faith it had been hidden beneath, the cavity where the scroll had slept for 2,000 years sat open in the dark, still and waiting, as though it too understood that the story it had carried across centuries was only now beginning to move.